Have you ever tried to thread a needle in poor lighting? Do it right now to grasp the scale of the lies we've been fed from the school bench. Now imagine that this thread is 3 times thinner than a human hair, and the needle's eye is invisible to the naked eye. Official history claims that in the 17th and 18th centuries, when only tallow candles and smoking pine splinters were available for lighting, illiterate peasant women created miles of lace with a weave density that even today's high-precision CNC machines cannot replicate. We are told that this was handmade work. We are told that it was bobbins and needles. But if you pick up a macro lens and examine the structure of Brussels lace or Venetian guipure from that era, you will see not textile. You will see an engineering structure whose precision is measured in thousandths of an inch. This is not handicraft art. This is technological absurdity that demolishes the entire chronology of human development. We are convinced that we descended from primitive ancestors who lived in filth and darkness. But these ancestors wore on their cuffs technologies centuries ahead of our time. You have been deceived. And the scale of this deception hides not in giant pyramids, but in what lies under glass in every local history museum. Let's set aside emotions and switch on dry logic and math. Take the famous point de gaze lace. Textile experts acknowledge that the thread thickness in such items often does not exceed 20 microns, or less than 1/1000th of an inch. For comparison, human hair thickness varies from 2 to 3 thousandths of an inch. That is, we are expected to believe that women, without electric light or optical magnifiers, worked with material literally on the verge of visibility. The official version states that lace makers worked in damp basements to keep the thread from drying out and breaking, and used glass balls filled with water to focus candlelight. It sounds romantic until you try to replicate it in practice. Any ophthalmologist will tell you that under such eye strain, complete blindness sets in within 3, at most 5 years. The retina simply burns out from the tension. Yet history assures us that this was mass production. Thousands of craftswomen supposedly wove these masterpieces for decades. Where are the millions of blind old women in the historical chronicles? Where are the social uprisings of the visually impaired? They don't exist. Either people of the past had eagle-like vision capable of microscope-level work, or these items were not created by humans. Or at least, not by hand. Look at the complex geometric patterns of Alençon lace. There are no errors. Handmade work always includes the human factor. A trembling hand, a slightly tighter thread pull, microscopic asymmetry. In 18th century museum samples, we observe machine-like perfection. Every knot is identical to the previous one. Stitch density reaches thousands per square centimeter, over 6,000 per square inch. If we translate this into the time required to tie one knot by hand, then making one wedding dress on display at the Metropolitan Museum would take about 200 years of continuous work by one person without sleep or rest. Do you grasp the absurdity of this arithmetic? We are told that a team of 100 people worked on the dress. Fine. Divide 200 years by 100 people. We get 2 years. But how can 100 people work simultaneously on one piece of fabric without getting in each other's way and maintaining uniform thread tension, which changes even from hand humidity? This is technologically impossible with manual labor. Any sewing production technologist will confirm. A different master's hand produces different density. Yet on antique laces, the density is uniform along the entire length, whether 5 yards or 50. This is a monolith. This is stamping. Or 3D printing at a molecular level available to that civilization. Ponder the economics of this process. If we believe the historians, these laces cost entire fortunes. But who could afford to maintain an army of highly skilled, even if blinding, slaves for a piece of fabric that could be torn by snagging on a doorknob? The economic model of producing such complexity by hand is unprofitable even for kings. To create 1 square yard of fabric with such detail by hand requires tens of thousands of man-hours. This is a colossal resource. In our world, such expenditures are justified only for making microprocessors or space satellites. And there it was just a collar. Just cuffs. People wore on themselves the equivalent of a small city's annual budget, and it was considered normal. Perhaps because producing these items was no labor for them? Perhaps what we call handmade lace was an ordinary product of automated factories for them, operating on principles forgotten or destroyed after a global catastrophe. We look at portraits of nobles from that era and see that they are literally draped in these impossible fabrics. This is not a single artifact. This is mass fashion. Tons, millions of yards of the finest fabric. Where did so much raw material of such quality come from? The flax, from which the threads were made, as claimed, must have undergone processing at the level of a modern chemical laboratory to produce fibers of such thinness and strength. Try splitting a flax stem by hand down to spiderweb thickness. It will tear. Machines are needed, reagents are needed, quality control technologies are needed. Where are these factories? Where are the machine blueprints? Historians show us primitive wooden spinning wheels and say, "This is what the masterpieces were made on." It's the same as showing a stone axe and saying it was used to assemble Swiss watches. They take us for idiots, feeding us crude folk illustrations instead of real technical documentation. There's another aspect that makes one uneasy: symbolism and patterns. If you enlarge an image of antique lace, you will see fractals. Complex, self-repeating mathematical structures that official science discovered only in the 20th century with the advent of computers. A peasant woman from an 18th century French province didn't know what fractal geometry was. She couldn't hold in her head a pattern scheme that repeats with mathematical progression over an area of several square yards. Computational power is needed for that. Either the brains of people from that time worked like computers, or a program did it for them. The patterns on laces often resemble printed circuit board schematics or wave interference patterns. What if these garments served not only a decorative function? What if we are looking at technical devices, protective suits or resonators, whose principles of operation we have lost, leaving only a cargo cult of pretty rag? What we see in museums is the remnants of luxury from a more advanced civilization. Official history is a screen hiding degradation. We are told that progress is linear, from simple to complex, from mammoth hide to nylon. But 17th century laces are more complex than modern fabrics. They are superior in quality, more durable, and thinner. This is involution. We lost technologies, not acquired them. Those who rewrote history couldn't destroy all material evidence, so they invented the legend of the great skill of ancestors. A convenient fairy tale. It strokes our ego. Supposedly, what talented great-grandmothers we had. But this fairy tale crumbles to dust as soon as you pick up a micrometer and calculator. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. If they lied to us about rags, imagine what they lied about in matters of city construction, population numbers, and the real reasons for the depopulation of entire continents. Next, we will examine facts that will make you shudder with the realization of how deep a technological pit we find ourselves in compared to those who lived here just 300 years ago. Let's delve into the very physics of the process that historians so brazenly lie about. We talked about vision, but what about materials? The official version states that all these weightless laces were woven from linen or cotton thread. Have you ever seen raw flax? It's a tough, coarse plant fiber. To turn it into thread as thin as a spider web, you need more than just a spinning wheel and nimble fingers. You need a complex chemical technological process of fiber separation called maceration, but on an industrial scale, using enzymes and acids that supposedly weren't even heard of in the 18th century. If you take a museum sample of lace under an electron microscope, you will see a thread structure that contradicts all laws of hand spinning. The thread is perfectly even along its entire length. It has no thickenings, no knots, no fuzziness typical of natural fiber twisted by hand. This is monofilament, or polymer, or modified cellulose that underwent extrusion, pushing through microscopic dyes under enormous pressure. That is, we're talking about late 20th century factory technologies, while they show us a wooden spindle. An even more devastating fact is the tools. Suppose we believed the fairy tale about miracle flax, but what did they use to weave these patterns? If it's needle lace, then the needle must be thinner than the thread itself. Remember those 20 microns, or less than 1/1000th of an inch? The needle must be made of super strong alloyed steel, so it doesn't bend or break at such thinness. But the most interesting part is the needle's eye. How on earth could an 18th century blacksmith, wielding a hammer and anvil, drill a hole just a few thousandths of an inch in diameter into hardened steel? Drills of that thickness didn't exist. There were no lasers, no electrical discharge machines. Even if we assume some genius left-hander made one such needle, producing tons of lace would require millions of needles. This would have to be mass, high-precision metallurgical production. Where are these factories? Where is the slag? Where are the furnaces? Where are the machines for machining microtools? They don't exist. Historians shrug and say, the secret is lost. How convenient. The secret of pyramid construction is lost. The secret of polygonal masonry is lost. The secret of microneedles is lost. Too many losses for a civilization that supposedly developed continuously? Let's turn to the scale. In any major European museum, miles of these laces are stored. Royal courts, nobility, clergy, all were decked out in them from head to toe. Calculate the yardage. That's hundreds of thousands of miles of thread. These are industrial volumes. If it were done by hand, the entire female population of Europe from age 5 to 80 would have to weave lace 24 hours a day without breaks for food, sleep, or raising children. But we know the population back then was several times smaller than today's. Who grew the grain? Who fought wars? Who built cities? The demographic model of handmade lace production doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. The numbers don't add up. The only logical explanation is machine production. There are strange engravings from that era that historians prefer not to publicize or interpret as allegories. They depict vast halls with rows of incomprehensible mechanisms where no people are present, yet the process continues. Official science calls this artists' fantasies. But what if these are documentary sketches of automated workshops? Looms operating on energy unknown to us, perhaps water, perhaps atmospheric electricity, as alternative history researchers often discuss. Lace is not just decoration. It is a product of a high-tech civilization that could stamp out the most complex polymers by the yard. And what they call bobbins may be just a pathetic attempt by degenerated descendants to imitate a process they had seen from their predecessors but no longer understood. This is a cargo cult. We picked up sticks and started banging them, hoping to get the same result as the machine produced, but ended up with a crude parody that today is passed off as folk art. Look at Europe's population density after the plague and endless 17th century wars. Cities stood half empty. Who were these millions of invisible weavers? Where did the resources come from? Logistics for raw materials on that production scale requires an advanced transportation network, which, per the official version, didn't exist. In muddy seasons, you can't haul much on carts. So there were other transportation corridors or delivery principles. Or production was localized in gigantic complexes that we now take for palaces or cathedrals. Have you ever wondered why so many ancient buildings have such enormous windows and high ceilings? For living quarters, it's irrational. You can't heat them. But for a workshop needing natural light and heat dissipation from operating mechanisms, it's ideal. The Hermitage, the Louvre, Versailles. What if originally these were not royal living quarters, but production facilities, factories of beauty and technology, which after a catastrophe and change of power were repurposed into housing for the new elite that seized the world? We are made to believe that the pinnacle of past technologies was the steam engine and the spinning wheel. But artifacts scream the opposite. Lace is proof of high technology, just like a microprocessor. We just got used to seeing technology in metal and plastic, not in threads. But the level of complexity in organizing matter in these items exceeds that of a modern smartphone. A smartphone is stamped out, while 18th century lace has a topology that's hard to compute even for modern supercomputers. There are knots that are impossible to tie with fingers because the thread end must pass through a loop smaller than the thread's own thickness. This is a topological paradox in three-dimensional space if working by hand, but it's a solvable task for a 3D printer that builds material layer by layer. Do you feel the world picture crumbling? We stand before the fact. Either our ancestors were aliens with microscopes in their eyes, or there existed a mighty industrial civilization here that was wiped from the face of the earth, leaving us only its wardrobe. And we wear out this wardrobe, inventing absurd tales about blind grandmothers with bobbins. But the scariest part is yet to come. If they could make such fabrics, what was their medicine like? What weapons? And most importantly, where did all those machines capable of knitting at the nanoscale disappear to? We are approaching the point of no return in our investigation, where technical inconsistencies escalate into a global historical tragedy. Have you ever wondered why fashion sharply degraded in the 19th century? Compare portraits from the early 18th century and mid-19th. In the former, we see ethereal beings draped in weightless foam of that very impossible lace, the most complex brocade fabrics that shimmer like holograms. And what do we see just 100 years later? Heavy velvet, coarse woolen cloth, primitive chintz, and corsets that encased women in armor. Where did the lightness go? Where did textile nanotechnology disappear to? Official history tells us about the Industrial Revolution, steam engines, progress. But our eyes see the opposite. We see technological regression. If machines were improving, why did fabric quality drop several-fold? The answer is terrifying but logical. A catastrophe occurred that destroyed the production base of the previous civilization. What we call the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century was not the invention of something new, but a clumsy attempt to resuscitate remnants of found technologies whose operating principles the new world masters understood only partially. Let's call things by their proper names. Those miles of lace that filled the chests of European nobility were not produced in their time. It was an inheritance. They were warehouses of finished goods found in cities' factories that survived the cataclysm. Imagine our civilization perishes, and 200 years later savages find a warehouse full of iPhones. They will wear them as jewelry, pray to them, but won't be able to produce a single new one. The same happened with lace. The aristocracy of the new era was essentially looters who dressed in the gods' garments. They wore out stockpiles calculated for the million-strong population of a highly advanced age, but which fell to a handful of surviving usurpers.
That's exactly why lace was valued by the weight of gold. Not because of the labor intensity of hand weaving, but because of its irreplaceability. When the warehouse emptied, the price skyrocketed. When the last machine still able to produce this product broke down, the secret was declared lost. Look at the physics of the patterns once more. We talked about fractals, but there's an even deeper layer here. Many ornaments on antique laces exactly replicate Chladni figures, patterns formed by sand on a vibrating plate under the influence of sound waves of a specific frequency. This is so-called cymatics. It means these structures were created not by weaving thread by thread, but by a method of wave impact on matter. Imagine a technology where form is dictated by sound, vibration, frequency. Liquid polymer or specially prepared organics solidifies in an instant, taking the shape of a standing wave. This explains the perfect symmetry and superhuman precision. This explains the absence of knots. The fabric was literally grown or structured by a field. And these technologies were available everywhere. People lived in a world where matter obeyed sound. And then this world fell silent. The equipment stopped. Those who knew how to tune frequencies perished or were destroyed. Only beautiful rags and legends about handicraft women remained. But the most shocking lies in the demographic figures. Historians tell us about constant wars, plague epidemics, and famines. Europe's population supposedly shrank by a third or even half. Yet the volumes of produced lace and textiles grew. This is mathematical nonsense. If half the population died, who worked? Who trained new masters? Training a lacemaker to that level takes 20 years. If a master dies, the school is interrupted. The chain of skill transmission breaks. But the quality of items in museums remains consistently high, up to a certain date, after which there is a sharp drop into primitivism. This drop coincides with dates of alleged global catastrophes that alternative researchers call the 18th century flood, or mud flood. Factories were buried under layers of soil. Ground floors of buildings sank into the earth, becoming basements. It was precisely there, in these basements, that the poor, blind lacemakers supposedly sat. But in reality, there were machines walled up there. We walk on the roofs of these workshops, unaware that beneath our feet lie mechanisms capable of clothing the whole world in silks in a week. There's another frightening theory. What if these laces were not just clothing? Look at their structure as a data carrier. It's like punch cards or QR codes of incredible complexity. They may encode information about genomes, star maps, technological processes. People wearing these collars and cuffs literally wore databases on themselves. Perhaps it was a friend-foe identification system in a high-tech society. Or protective fields generated by the pattern shape, working like passive antennas. We see it as decor because we are savages who lost the meaning. We see beauty where there was function. Loss of functionality led to a cargo cult of fashion. We copy the form without understanding the content. Generals' epaulettes, aiguillettes, complex collars, all these are rudiments of technical devices that once worked, glowed, protected, or transmitted data. Now it's just tinsel. We stand before the fact of a cosmic-scale concept substitution. We were convinced that humanity slowly crawled out of caves, but artifacts scream that we are degenerated descendants of titans. Lace is evidence.
evidence against the official version of history. Evidence that cannot be forged, because today, with all our electronics and lasers, we cannot create a copy of what an illiterate peasant woman supposedly made by pine splinter light. Now that we've dissected the technical impossibility and demographic absurdity of the official version, it's time to ask the main question that chills the blood. Who needed this grand falsification, and why? Why do historians defend the myth of blind old women and pine splinters frothing at the mouth, ignoring obvious facts of machine production? The answer lies on the surface, but it's so cynical that our minds refuse to accept it. Erasing memory of past high technologies is the foundation of modern power. If we admit that 200 or 300 years ago, a civilization existed here surpassing us in matter manipulation, the entire concept of societal evolution collapses. The myth crumbles that the state and science lead us to the light. It turns out we're not progressing, but degrading on the ruins of giants. And the elites ruling the world are not creators of progress, but jailers, hiding from the prisoners the truth about their great past. Recall the Luddite movement at the beginning of the 19th century. In school, we were told they were dark, uneducated workers who smashed machines because they feared losing jobs. What a monstrous lie. Think about it. Workers who live off production destroy the means of production. That's suicide. But what if we look at it from another angle? What if Luddites were not rebels, but specially hired cleanup squads? Their goal was destroying remnants of high-tech equipment from the previous era, which the new Life Masters couldn't repair or reproduce. Complex, automated complexes operating on unknown principles were smashed with sledgehammers to make way for primitive steam engines that they passed off as the crown of creation. The Industrial Revolution was not a leap forward, but a cleanup of evidence. They destroyed what they couldn't control, and what could give humanity freedom from heavy physical labor. Look at museum policies. Why are 90% of the collections of the Hermitage, Louvre, or Smithsonian Institution closed to the public? We're told lack of space, restoration, fragility of exhibits. But insiders and independent researchers claim otherwise. In the storage vaults lie items that cannot be explained within the official chronology. There lie those very laces woven from polymers that defy carbon dating. There lie fabrics with embedded metal threads of such purity that can only be obtained in a vacuum. If this were put on display, physics and chemistry textbooks would have to be rewritten. We'd have to admit that the periodic table was known and used long before Mendeleev. That's why they show us only safe exhibits, those that can somehow, with a stretch, be attributed to hand labor. All inconvenient artifacts are declared forgeries, or simply hidden in dark basements, where even professors are denied entry without special clearance. There's another aspect: psychological terrorism. The myth of our ancestors' grueling labor is implanted in our consciousness from childhood, so we feel guilt and gratitude toward the system. We're told, "Look how hard your great-grandmothers lived. They went blind by candlelight so you could live in comfort." This is programming for slavery. We're convinced that heavy, monotonous, health-destroying labor is the norm, heroism. But laces scream the opposite. Our ancestors lived in a world of abundance and technology, where creativity was separated from drudgery. Machines did the work, and people pursued art and science. The system stole this vision of the future from us, replacing it with an image of a suffering past. They want us to think we're the pinnacle of evolution, when in reality we're savages who have forgotten how to even make buttons the way they did 300 years ago. Let's analyze the behavior of 19th century elites. Suddenly, as if on command, they start wearing simplified clothing. The men's suit turns into a drab black shell. Women's dresses lose that very airiness and complexity. Why? because the warehouse stocks ran out. Old machines were destroyed or broke down, and new, primitive looms could only churn out plain fabric. A global shift in technological paradigm occurred. This wasn't fashion evolution, it was a resource crisis. The elite could no longer afford nanotechnology because the source dried up. And to hide this shame, they introduced a fashion for severity and restraint. They pretended it was intentional, a new style, not a forced measure. This is a classic manipulation tactic. If you can't have something, declare it unfashionable or outdated.
We must also pay attention to the strange fires that destroyed archives and libraries worldwide in the 18th and 19th centuries. It wasn't just papers burning. Blueprints, schematics, and technological charts were burning. Someone was meticulously covering tracks. Information on how to set up a machine for weaving lace with a density of 5,000 knots per square centimeter, over 30,000 per square inch, was more dangerous than gunpowder. Because knowledge is power. If these technologies had remained accessible to the people, we would live in a completely different world. A world without shortages, without grueling labor. But someone needed to turn humanity into an obedient herd preoccupied with survival. And lace is that very thread. Pull it, and you can unravel the entire ball of lies. It's not just a rag. It's evidence for the prosecution in the trial of history that still lies ahead. The situation is heating up to the breaking point. We understand we've been robbed. They didn't just steal technologies from us. They stole our memory of our capabilities. We look at a museum display case and see not a handicraft woman's skill, but our stolen heritage. These things were created for us, for people whose lives were meant to be light and beautiful. But we were made to believe we were born into filth. And this evokes not just surprise, but rage. Rage from realizing the scale of betrayal. We live in scenery built on the ruins of a more perfect world. The picture formed from millions of microscopic knots terrifies with its scale. Lace from the 17th and 18th centuries is not just textile. It's the black box of a perished civilization that we've cracked open, but fear to read. All these facts, the impossible weaving density for the human eye, the absence of microtools in archaeological layers, the absurd demographic statistics, and the technological regression of the 19th century lead to a single logical conclusion. We live amid the ruins of a world destroyed instantly and globally. The history we're taught is a hastily stitched patchwork quilt meant to hide the scars from the amputation of an entire humanity's memory. Those who survived, or came in their place, couldn't restore matter manipulation technologies, so they created a simulacrum, a cargo cult of progress, where instead of controlling the atomic structure of substances, we burn coal and oil, poisoning the planet that our predecessors apparently maintained in perfect harmony and purity.